The first time my straight neighbor knocked on my door at almost midnight, I honestly thought something was wrong. Like, emergency wrong. I was half asleep on the couch, Netflix still playing something I'd stopped watching an hour ago, when I heard the knock slow, hesitant, not aggressive, but not casual either. The kind of knock that already carries weight with it. I checked the time on my phone. 11:47 p.m. When I opened the door, there he was. Mike, my neighbor from across the courtyard. Tall, broad-shouldered, still wearing his work shirt with the sleeves rolled up like he'd forgotten to take it off. His hair looked messier than usual, like he'd been running his hands through it too many times. His eyes were red, not drunk red, but tired red. Worn down. "Hey," he said, voice low. "Sorry to bother you this late." "No, it's fine," I replied automatically, stepping aside. "Everything okay?" He hesitated for half a second, just long enough for me to notice. Then he nodded, even though the nod didn't quite match his expression. "Yeah. I mean, not really. But I was wondering if I could talk for a bit." That was how it started. Mike had moved in about 6 months earlier. Divorced or separated, I wasn't totally sure at first. He'd mentioned a wife once in passing when we ran into each other by the mailboxes, and later I stopped seeing a wedding ring. We weren't close, but we were friendly in that apartment building way. Nods. Small talk. Occasionally sharing a beer at those awkward courtyard cookouts the building manager insisted on hosting. I also knew he was straight. Very straight. Former college athlete straight. Married to a woman for 10 years straight. And I was very much not. So when he stepped into my apartment that night, standing awkwardly near the door like he didn't know where to put himself, I had no idea that my quiet, predictable life was about to tilt sideways. We ended up on the balcony. It was late summer, still warm enough that the air felt heavy but comfortable. I handed him a beer, and he took it like it was something solid he could anchor himself to. For a while, neither of us said anything. We just leaned against the railing, staring out at the dimly lit parking lot below. Somewhere in the distance, a car alarm chirped and stopped. The city felt muted, like it was giving us space. "She's filing," he said suddenly. I glanced over. "Your wife?" He nodded, jaw tightening. "Yeah. Divorce papers are in motion, I guess." That's the phrase the lawyer used. "Shit," I said quietly. "I'm sorry." He exhaled hard, like he'd been holding that breath all night. Everyone keeps saying that. I don't even know what I'm supposed to say back. We talked for hours. About the marriage. About how it hadn't been bad. Exactly, just empty toward the end. About how he'd thrown himself into work instead of dealing with it. About how lonely it felt to sleep in a bed that suddenly felt too big. I mostly listened. Occasionally asked a question. Let him ramble. There was something strangely intimate about it, standing shoulder to shoulder in the dark, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. At some point, he laughed softly and shook his head. "I don't know why I'm telling you all this." I shrugged. Balconies do that to people. Late-night confession zones. He smiled at that. A real smile, not the strained one he'd been wearing all evening. That night became a pattern. Late-night talks. Always on the balcony. Sometimes with beers, sometimes just sitting on the concrete floor with our backs against the railing. He never crossed a line. Never flirted. Never said anything that made me think he saw me as anything other than a safe place to land. And that was the problem. Because somewhere between the third and fourth night, I realized I was starting to wait for the knock. And somewhere between the fifth and sixth, I realized the way he looked at me had changed. Not in an obvious way, not yet, but in a gentler one. Like he was allowing himself to relax around me in ways he didn't with anyone else. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself he was straight. Vulnerable. Grieving his marriage. I told myself I was just being a good neighbor. But late at night, standing too close on that balcony, listening to his voice drop when he talked about the things he was afraid to say out loud, I could feel something forming between us. Something neither of us had planned. The thing about late-night balcony talks is that they sneak up on you. They start harmless, two people avoiding sleep, leaning into the quiet because it feels safer than being alone with your thoughts. But the longer they go on, the more the walls come down. And once they're down, you don't always notice what you're building in their place. By the second week, Mike didn't knock anymore. He'd just text first. "You up?" Sometimes I was already outside when he stepped onto his balcony across from mine. Phone still in his hand, like he wasn't sure whether to come over yet. Other times, I'd open the door to find him standing there with that same tired half smile, shoulders slumped like the day had finally caught up with him. One night, he brought pizza. Another night, he brought nothing but himself and a silence that felt heavier than usual. You ever feel like you failed at something you tried really hard to get right? He asked, staring straight ahead. I didn't answer right away. Yeah, I said eventually. More than once. He nodded slowly. I keep replaying everything, wondering which version of me she needed that I wasn't. That was the first time I saw his hands shake. It was subtle, barely there, but his fingers tightened around the bottle he was holding, knuckles whitening, and before I could stop myself, I reached out. I didn't grab his hand. I just rested my fingers over his knuckles. Light. Questioning. He froze. For half a second, my heart slammed so hard I was sure he could hear it. I told myself I'd crossed a line. I was already pulling back when his hand shifted under mine, not away, but closer. He let out a breath that sounded like relief. Sorry, he murmured. I didn't realize how tense I was. It's okay, I said, even though my pulse was out of control. We stayed like that for maybe 10 seconds. Maybe 30. Tom was weird out there at night. Then he gently pulled his hand away, but the warmth lingered. On my skin. In my chest. After that, things changed. Not dramatically. Not in a way you could point to and say that's when it happened. Just slightly. He sat closer. Our shoulders brushed more often. He started asking me questions too about my job, my dating life, my family. I was careful with my answers. Not dishonest, just selective. He knew I was gay. That had come up early on, said casually, like it wasn't a big deal. He hadn't flinched, just nodded and said, cool. But now, when he asked about my ex, or why I'd stopped seeing someone, his focus sharpened, like it mattered. One night, it was quieter than usual. No beer, no pizza, just the hum of traffic and the occasional laugh drifting up from someone else's open window. I don't know how to be alone, he admitted suddenly. I looked at him. His face was turned toward the city, but his eyes were unfocused. Somewhere else entirely. I've been with someone since I was 22, he continued. I went from roommates to living together to married. I don't even remember what it's like to just exist without checking in with someone else. I swallowed. You're doing okay. He scoffed softly. I'm showing up at my neighbor's place every night because I don't want to sit in my apartment by myself. I smiled a little. I don't mind. I know, he said. That's the thing. He turned to face me then. Fully. Close enough that I could see the faint crease between his brows, the way his lashes cast shadows under the balcony light. You make it easier, he said quietly. Something tightened in my chest. Mike, I'm not saying anything weird, he added quickly. I just being here helps. Being with you helps. I nodded, even though my brain was screaming at me to be careful. I'm glad. The air felt charged after that. Not physical. Not exactly. Just aware. Like we both knew we were standing at the edge of something we didn't have words for yet. The first time he stayed too late was an accident. We lost track of time. The way you do when you're talking about nothing and everything at once. When he checked his phone, his expression shifted. Shit, he said. It's almost 2. You can crash on the couch if you want. I offered before I could think better of it. No pressure. He hesitated. I saw the debate play out on his face. Yeah, he said finally. If that's okay. It was just a couch. Just sleep. Just helping a friend through a rough time. That's what I told myself as I handed him a blanket. That's what I told myself as I lay awake in my bedroom, staring at the ceiling, hyper-aware of his presence just a few feet away. That's what I told myself right up until I heard him whisper my name from the dark. Hey, he said softly. You still awake? And somehow, I already knew that whatever line we were pretending hadn't been crossed. We were standing right on top of it. I'm awake, I answered, my voice quieter than I expected. There was a pause. I could picture him on the couch, probably staring at the ceiling the same way I had been, weighing whether he should say whatever came next. Can I ask you something kind of personal? He said. I sat up in bed, already knowing sleep was officially off the table. Yeah. Another pause. Longer this time. Do you ever stop wanting someone? He asked slowly. Even when you know it's over? That question landed heavier than anything else he'd said so far. I exhaled, staring at the faint outline of my bedroom door. Sometimes you stop wanting them, I said. But you don't stop wanting what you had, or what you thought you were building. He was quiet for so long I wondered if he'd fallen asleep. Then, that makes sense. I heard the couch shift. Footsteps. Slow ones. Hey, he said softly, from just outside my bedroom. I'm not trying to be weird. I don't think I can be alone right now. My hand tightened in the sheets. This was it. Another moment where I could redirect things. Set a boundary. Be responsible. You can come in, I said. The door creaked open. He didn't turn the light on. Just stood there for a second, a tall shadow against the darker hallway. I'll take the floor, he said quickly. I just dash. Mike, I interrupted, gentler than I felt. It's fine. You can sit on the bed. He moved carefully, like he was hyper-aware of every inch of space between us. He perched on the edge at first, hands clasped, shoulders tense. We didn't touch. The silence wasn't awkward exactly, just loaded, the kind that presses against your chest. I haven't slept in weeks, he admitted. Every time I close my eyes, my brain just keeps going. Yeah, I said. That happens. He laughed quietly. You're really good at this. At what? At making things feel less catastrophic. I glanced at him. Even in the low light, I could see how tired he was. Not just physically, emotionally wrung out. You don't have to carry it all by yourself, I said. He nodded, swallowing. I know. Another stretch of silence. This one warmer. Then he leaned back just slightly until his shoulder brushed mine. It was the smallest contact. Barely there. But neither of us moved away. I've never talked like this with anyone before, he said. Not like this. Yeah, I replied. I figured. His shoulder pressed a little more firmly against mine. Deliberate now. Is this okay? He asked. I didn't answer with words. I just stayed. After a minute, his head tipped back, resting against the wall. His breathing slowed. Steadied. I could feel it through our shoulders, sinking in that quiet way bodies sometimes do without permission. I didn't realize how close we were until he shifted again and our knees touched. Neither of us apologized. I don't know what I'm doing, he murmured. I don't think you have to, I said. He turned his head toward me. Our faces were close enough now that I could feel the warmth of his breath. The moment stretched thin, trembling with possibility. Then he looked away. I should probably try to sleep, he said, almost reluctantly. Yeah, I agreed, even though my heart was pounding. He lay back carefully, still fully dressed, hands folded over his chest like he didn't trust them not to wander. I stayed sitting, unsure whether to leave or lie down too. After a second, he spoke again. Will you stay? Just for a bit. So I did. I lay beside him, leaving a careful gap between us. We faced the same direction, staring up at the ceiling, close enough to feel each other's presence, but not close enough to call it anything else. After a while, his breathing deepened, evened out. I didn't sleep. I lay there listening to him, to the steady rhythm of a man who trusted me enough to fall apart quietly in my space. And somewhere in the middle of the night, without fully waking up, he rolled slightly toward me, close enough that his arm rested against my side, close enough that I knew this wasn't just about helping him through a divorce anymore. This was something else, something fragile, something dangerous. And in the dark, with his breath warm against my shoulder, I realized I didn't want to stop it. I must have drifted off at some point, because the next thing I knew, light was creeping in through the blinds. Early morning light, the kind that makes everything feel too honest. I became aware of Mike before I fully woke up. His arm was still there, heavy and warm against my side. Not wrapped around me, not holding me, just resting, like his body had decided where it felt safest without consulting his brain. For a few seconds, I didn't move. I just lay there, listening to him breathe, feeling the slow rise and fall of his chest close to my back. My body was tense, not with fear, but with awareness. Every nerve felt turned up too high. Then he stirred. I felt at the moment his consciousness caught up with the situation. His breathing changed first sharper, quicker. His arm tensed, like he was deciding whether to pull away. Hey, I murmured, before he could panic. You're okay. He went still again. Morning, he said quietly, voice rough with sleep. Morning. Another pause. This one different. Awake. Careful. I didn't mean to dash, he stopped himself, then exhaled. Sorry. You didn't do anything, I said. I told you it was okay. He rolled onto his back, staring at the ceiling like it might offer answers. I turned slightly so I could see his face. He looked conflicted. Not guilty. Not embarrassed. Just deeply unsure. I don't usually do stuff like this, he said. I know. He glanced at me, searching my face. This isn't leading you on or anything, is it? That question hit harder than it should have. I chose my words carefully. I'm not assuming anything. You needed comfort. I gave it. That's all. He nodded slowly, relief flickering across his expression. Good. Because I don't want to hurt you. Something about the way he said it made my chest ache. I trust you, I replied. And I meant it, even though some part of me was already bracing for impact. We didn't talk much after that. He showered, borrowed a clean towel. I made coffee. We stood in the kitchen, close but not touching, like we were both recalibrating. Before he left, he hesitated by the door. Thank you, he said. For last night. For everything. Anytime, I said. He smiled, softer than usual. Then he left. For the rest of the day, my apartment felt strangely empty. He didn't come over that night. Or the next. I told myself it was good. Healthy, even. Space. Perspective. I went back to my routine work, gym, takeout eaten alone on the couch. But everything felt slightly off, like I'd shifted my furniture an inch to the left and now kept bumping into it. On the fourth night, there was a knock. I didn't even check the time this time. He looked different. Cleaner. More put together. But his eyes were the same restless. I've been thinking a lot, he said, once we were back on the balcony. That's never a good sign, I joked weakly. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I keep replaying that night. And the nights before it. I leaned against the railing, heart already speeding up. Okay. I don't regret it, he said quickly. That's the thing. I thought I would. But I don't. My throat tightened. Mike, I'm not saying I suddenly have everything figured out, he continued. I don't. I really don't. But when I'm with you, things feel quieter. And when I'm not, he shook his head. They don't. The air between us felt electric again. Familiar. Dangerous. I don't want to use you, he said. I don't want this to be some rebound mess that ends with us not talking anymore. So what do you want? I asked softly. He looked at me then. Really looked at me. I want to keep being honest, he said. Even if it's uncomfortable. Even if it's confusing. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Okay, I said. Honesty works both ways. I know, he replied. That's why I'm saying this now. He took a step closer. Not touching. Just close enough that the space between us felt intentional. I don't know what this is yet, he said. But I don't want to stop it. Neither did I. And when his hand finally brushed mine, this time, without hesitation, I knew there was no pretending anymore. Whatever we were doing, whatever we were becoming, we'd crossed into it together. After that night, things stopped pretending to be casual. They also didn't suddenly become romantic in the obvious way people expect. There was no dramatic confession. No kiss that magically clarified everything. Just a quiet shift, like the ground settling after an earthquake, still unstable, but changed forever. Mike started coming over earlier in the evenings now. Not just after midnight when loneliness hit its peak, but around 9 or 10, when the night still felt optional instead of necessary. Sometimes we cooked. Sometimes we sat on the balcony in silence, our legs stretched out, knees almost touching. Almost always touching, eventually. He didn't pull away anymore when our hands brushed. Didn't flinch when my knee rested against his thigh. Once, when I laughed at something stupid he said, my hand landed on his arm and stayed there longer than it needed to. He noticed. I could tell by the way his breathing changed. One night, he finally said it out loud. I've been paying attention to how my body reacts around you, he admitted, staring into his beer like it might judge him. And I don't really know what to do with that. I didn't joke this time. You don't have to do anything with it right now. He nodded, but his jaw tightened. That's the problem. I think I want to. The honesty in that scared both of us. After that, we set rules. Not out loud, not formally, but they existed. No physical stuff when he was clearly spiraling about his ex. No pretending this meant he was suddenly someone else. No rushing. And above all, no lying. That last one was the hardest. Because the closer we got, the more complicated his divorce became. There were nights he showed up angry, venting about lawyers and assets and how unfair it felt to be reduced to paperwork. Other nights, he was quiet, distant, like he was mourning something that still technically existed. On those nights, I stayed grounded. I didn't push. I didn't reach for him unless he reached first. But sometimes he did. Like the night it rained. It was one of those sudden summer storms, thunder cracking overhead, rain slamming into the concrete like it had a grudge. We were inside this time, sitting on opposite ends of the couch, watching the storm through the sliding glass door. She texted me today, he said suddenly. My stomach dropped, but I kept my voice steady. Yeah. He nodded. Just logistics. Boxes. The dog. You okay? He laughed softly. I don't know. I thought I'd feel something bigger. Anger. Sadness. Something. But mostly I just felt tired. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, head hanging. Without thinking, I shifted closer. You don't have to be strong here, I said. He looked up at me then. Really looked at me. I feel safe with you, he said. The word safe hit me harder than anything else. He moved first. Slowly. Like he was giving me time to stop him. He didn't kiss me. Not yet. He just leaned in until his forehead rested against mine. That was it. No pressure. No rush. Just shared breath, shared space. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, like he didn't trust them either. Tell me if this is too much, he murmured. It's not, I replied honestly. We stayed like that for a long time. Long enough that the rain softened. The thunder moved farther away. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were dark, conflicted, but clear. I'm not ready for more, he said. But I think I'm getting there. I nodded. That's okay. He exhaled, like he'd been holding that breath for weeks. Then, impulsively, he pulled me into a hug. A real one this time. His arms wrapped around me, strong and sure, and I felt him sink into it like he'd needed it more than he realized. I hugged him back, pressing my cheek against his shoulder, breathing him in. When we pulled apart, neither of us smiled. But something had settled. Later, after he left, I lay awake thinking about how strange it was how intimacy didn't always arrive with fireworks or urgency. Sometimes it arrived quietly, wrapped in patience and restraint, growing roots instead of sparks. Mike wasn't mine. I knew that. But he wasn't just my straight neighbor anymore either. And whatever this was becoming, it was moving forward. Slowly, deliberately. And I had a feeling the next step, whenever it came, would change everything. The next step didn't come all at once. It came in moments. Small ones. Quiet ones. The kind you don't realize are milestones until you look back and see how far you've moved. Mike started telling people about me. Not about me in any loaded way. Just mentioning me. Co-workers. His sister. The guy from work he grabbed lunch with sometimes. I'd hear it casually, like it wasn't a big deal. I was talking to my neighbor about that, he'd say. Or, my neighbor made this the other night, turns out I can't cook for shit. But the word neighbor started to feel insufficient. One night, we were walking back from a late taco run, something we'd started doing once a week, just to get out of our own heads. The sidewalk was damp from an earlier rain, streetlights reflecting off the pavement. You ever notice, he said, hands shoved into his jacket pockets, that people assume things about you without asking? I glanced at him. Constantly. He nodded. Yeah, me too lately. We stopped at the crosswalk. Cars rushed past, the city loud around us. I told my sister I've been spending a lot of time with you, he continued. She asked if we were dating. My heart jumped, traitorous and fast. And I told her no, he said quickly. Then, softer, but I didn't tell her yes either. The light changed. We crossed in silence. I don't know what box this fits into, he said. And I don't want to force it into one just to make other people comfortable. I'm not asking you to, I replied. He stopped walking. Turned to me. But I do want to know, he said, carefully, that you're okay being seen with me, even if I don't have the right words yet. That mattered more than he probably realized. I'm here, I said simply. That night, back at my place, we sat closer than usual on the couch. Our legs touched, stayed touching. When his phone buzzed, he didn't immediately pull away like he used to. Progress. Then came the setback. It was inevitable. I knew that. Still didn't make it easier. He showed up one evening quieter than usual, shoulders tense, jaw tight. She came by today, he said. I didn't ask who she was. We sat on the balcony, the familiar place now tinged with something uneasy. She wanted to talk. Closure, I guess, he continued. She cried. I didn't. That somehow made me feel worse. I listened, let him unload. But I could feel the distance creeping back in, like a tide pulling him away from shore. When he left that night, he didn't hug me. The next few days were muted. He still texted, still came over. But something was off, like he'd pulled a layer back up around himself, protective and unsure. I didn't chase him. That was the hardest part. I reminded myself that this wasn't about me. That grief isn't linear. That he was allowed to step back without it meaning he was stepping away forever. Then, one night, he showed up looking wrecked. Eyes red, hair damp like he'd showered too long. I'm scared, he said as soon as the door closed behind him. Of what? I asked. That if I let myself want this, he said, voice breaking just slightly, I'll lose it too. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stepped closer and rested my hand on his chest. Not physical, not urgent, just grounding. You don't have to decide everything right now, I said. You just have to be honest in the moment you're in. His breath hitched. I want you, he said quietly. The words hung there. Heavy, honest. I searched his face. Because you're lonely? Or because it's me? Because it's you, he said without hesitation. And that's what scares me. I nodded. Then we go slow. Slower if we need to. But we don't pretend it isn't real. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against mine again, our thing, apparently. His hands hovered at my sides, uncertain. Tell me if I cross a line, he whispered. I will. This time, when his lips brushed my cheek soft, tentative, it felt earned. Not rushed. Not stolen. Just chosen. And in that moment, I knew something important had shifted. He wasn't just finding comfort anymore. He was choosing connection. And whatever came next, labels, questions, complications, I was no longer just helping him through a divorce. I was standing beside him as he figured out who he was becoming. After that first kiss, if you could even call it that, everything felt different. Not louder, not dramatic, just clearer. Mike didn't pull away afterward. That alone felt monumental. Instead, he stayed, sitting beside me on the couch, our shoulders pressed together, his hand resting on his thigh like he was consciously keeping it there instead of letting it drift somewhere uncertain. I keep waiting for the panic to hit, he admitted quietly. Like I'm supposed to freak out or regret it, or feel like I crossed some irreversible line. And I asked. And it hasn't, he said, which somehow makes it scarier. I smiled faintly. Welcome to self-awareness. He huffed out a laugh, then sobered again. I don't know what this means for me. About labels. About anything. But I know I don't want to pretend it didn't happen. That's enough for now, I said. It really is. From then on, he stayed over more often. Not sleeping in my bed, at least not yet, but stretched out beside me on the couch, his socked feet nudging mine, his arm occasionally draped over the backrest behind me. Casual to anyone else. Loaded to us. Sometimes he'd fall asleep like that, head tilted toward me. I'd stay still, afraid to disturb the fragile piece of it. Afraid to want too much. One night, after a particularly long day for both of us, he showed up with a bottle of cheap wine and that look on his face that told me he'd been thinking too hard again. Can I ask you something without it turning into a whole thing? He asked. I can try, I replied. Did you ever wait for someone who couldn't meet you where you were? He asked. The question was too precise to be casual. Yes, I said honestly. And I promised myself I wouldn't do it again. He nodded slowly, absorbing that. I don't want to be that guy. Then don't be, I said gently. You don't have to sprint. But you can't stand still forever either. That sat between us for a while. The next weekend, he invited me to his place for the first time. It shouldn't have felt like a big deal. We lived 30 feet apart. But stepping into his apartment felt intimate in a way mine no longer did. Photos on the walls. A coffee mug that still had their initials on it. The faint echo of a life that was in the process of dissolving. He noticed me noticing. Most of that stuff's coming down, he said, almost apologetic. You don't have to erase your past for me, I replied. I know, he said. I just don't want it hovering. We cooked together. Badly. He bumped into me more than necessary in the tiny kitchen. Once, his hand landed on my lower back to steady me, and this time, neither of us pretended it was accidental. After dinner, we sat on his couch. The dynamic felt different here. Less controlled. More exposed. I think I'm ready to try, he said suddenly. My heart kicked up. Try what? He turned toward me, eyes steady but nervous. This. Us. Whatever version of it we're capable of right now. I didn't answer immediately. I needed him to see that this mattered. I'm not a test run, I said carefully. I can't be a phase you look back on and reframe when things get uncomfortable. I know, he said, and I'm not asking you to be. I studied his face, searching for doubt. What I saw instead was resolve, quiet, cautious, but real. Okay, I said. This time, when he kissed me, there was no hesitation. It was still slow, still restrained. But his hand came to rest on my jaw, thumb brushing my cheek, like he was memorizing the shape of me. When we pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine again, our breaths uneven. That felt right, he said softly. It did, I agreed. Later that night, lying beside him in his bed fully clothed, A careful space between us. I stared at the ceiling and felt something unfamiliar settle into my chest. Not fear, not doubt, hope. Mike rolled onto his side, facing me. His hand found mine under the covers, fingers threading together like it was the most natural thing in the world. Stay, he murmured, already half asleep. I'm not going anywhere, I said. And for the first time since he'd knocked on my door weeks ago, I believed that whatever came next wasn't about surviving something painful anymore. It was about choosing something new. The morning after I stayed over, we didn't rush. That alone felt new. Sunlight filtered through the half-open blinds, soft and unassuming, landing across Mike's face. He was still asleep, one arm stretched out like he'd been reaching for something in his dreams. I lay there quietly, listening to him breathe, letting myself fully register where I was. Not sneaking out, not bracing for regret, just there. When he woke up, he didn't pull away, didn't tense. He just blinked a few times, then smiled slow, genuine, a little surprised. Hey, he said. Hey. He stared at the ceiling for a moment, then turned his head toward me. I feel okay. I smiled. That's a good sign. He laughed softly. Yeah, it is. We made coffee together. Bad coffee, because neither of us remembered how strong he usually made it. We drank it anyway, standing barefoot in his kitchen, bumping into each other in that easy, domestic way that felt almost dangerous in how right it seemed. I told my sister about you, he said casually, like he was talking about the weather. I froze for half a second. Yeah. He nodded. Not everything, but enough. I told her I'm seeing someone. That it's different, important. And I asked. She said she just wants me to be happy, he replied. Then she asked when she gets to meet you. Something warm spread through my chest. Not fireworks, not adrenaline, just warmth. The weeks that followed weren't perfect. We had conversations that were awkward, necessary ones, about boundaries, about expectations, about how he was still figuring himself out, and how I needed honesty more than certainty. He stumbled sometimes, said the wrong thing, got quiet when things felt overwhelming. But the difference now was that he came back. Every time. One night, sitting on my balcony again, the place where it all started, he took my hand and didn't let go. I used to think this chapter of my life was about losing something, he said. My marriage. The future I thought I had mapped out. I squeezed his fingers gently. And now I think it's about becoming someone more honest, he said. Even when it's uncomfortable. He turned to me, eyes steady. Especially when it's uncomfortable. I leaned into him, resting my head against his shoulder. The city hummed around us, unchanged, indifferent. But everything inside me felt settled. This wasn't a fantasy. It wasn't a sudden transformation. It wasn't a straight guy magically rewritten overnight. It was two people meeting each other where they actually were. Helping turned into trusting. Trust turned into choosing. And choosing turned into something real. Months later, when someone asked how we met, Mike just smiled and said, he helped me through a rough time. He never mentioned the divorce first. And every time I heard him say it, I thought back to that first knock on my door late, hesitant, heavy with things he didn't yet know how to name. Neither of us planned this. But sometimes, the best things in your life don't come from plans at all. They come from being awake at the right moment and opening the door.